Hello, everyone. I was tempted to say good morning because it does feel like a morning given the weather. But I'm so happy that many of you have come close to the stage, hopefully close enough for a bit of inspiration from the people who will be talking to us today, this afternoon. And this is the first event for the third day of the Nairobi Lit Fest. So I hope it'll be an engaging and stimulating and very useful conversation. And at some point, I will invite you to bring your questions. So do think about the things that you want to sort of engage with our panelists here. But for now, I will start us off with introducing who we have on stage. So right near me, I can't tell left from right, so just forgive me for that. But right next to me is Ngartia, who I've known for a very, very long time. He is a poet, he's a storyteller, he has fronted, produced, and performed in various iconic stage productions, some of them known as Those Too Early for Birds, which made such a sensation, and more recently there's been Diverse. He uses spoken word as well as music to be able to guide his performances. And then we have Sarah. Let me just dig up. She has a very, quite a range with her photography and her visual journalism. So let me just pull that up here. So we have Sarah Waiswa. She is Ugandan, but she is based here in Nairobi and is a photographer. A lot of her work has been featured in various magazines and newspapers across the world, but her work also focuses a lot on new African identity. And then we have Nguru, who is the Executive Director for Public Health Innovation, based in Nairobi. And more recently, he has compiled, I think you had a copy with you, narrative pieces. It's called We've Been Here, and it's stories about belonging and what it just means to sort of wake up to a consciousness of who you are sexually, sensually, but also as a person. So I'm hoping that they will be able to dive into this conversation around identity and the different ways that you've been able to explore that. So I guess the obvious question is, what do you each think of identity as, and how have you used your work to be able to explore that? Anyone can start.
Check. So first of all, thank you for the lovely introduction, and thank you to Book Bank and the Lit Fest for having us here. That's so we're jumping straight into the deep end, huh?
Yes.
So I would say, to me, identity is a mosaic. It's not this clear-cut thing. It's a map you keep exploring over and over, and identity keeps shifting. So you're moving through different stages, so like 8 sets and all that, and at every different point you have an identity. At the moment, there's a huge group being identified as Gen Z or whatever, or Gen X and all that, but they won't have the same characteristics they have right now in the next 15, 30 years, so that's a shifting thing. If you live in Kenya, you have overlapping identities. There are spaces you're born into, ethnically, regionally, and all that, and that might shift at some point. So I was born in a space that was predominantly, say, Kikuyu and Maasai, and then at some point shifted to a space that was predominantly Meru. And that has influenced how I see myself. And then at some point I moved to Nairobi, and those kind of took a backseat, and they were what informed my identity here, but not what I identify as at the moment, right? So, yeah, for me, it's a mosaic that keeps changing and that we have to keep exploring and defining. I've tried to go through different parts of it with my work with Too Early for Birds. It's mostly been through exploring history and Kenyan history and how that has informed the present we're in, that is very active at the moment. And with my poetry, it has been for looking at the present as opposed to the past, and especially the spaces I am active in my life, in my love life, in my political life, in my day-to-day as a young man who might be shot down at any moment in Nairobi, and everything that life is about at the moment. So yeah, that's for me.
Thank you for the introduction, Beverly. I think for me, and especially as a visual person, I think identity can be how you see yourself. And obviously that is influenced by various things, various social, cultural issues, where you live, where you're from, how you're raised, all those things will have an effect on your identity and how free you are to express yourself. And so for me and my work, I am very much interested in how young people express themselves, particularly young Africans, and of course young Kenyans, because this is where I'm based and grew up. And so I'm very much interested in how free young people are in expressing themselves, particularly through fashion, through art, through music. And so that's kind of what my work explores.
Good, it's working. Thank you so much, Beverly, and thanks. My name is Nguru again, and I completely concur. Identity is multiple, can be multiple things, and actually really captures very well in our book because there are certain narratives about who it is that we think we are in terms of how maybe society lays out you're this or you're that may not always or may invisibilize certain people. And what this book, I think we'll dig deeper about this, talks about identities of a particular grouping of people. These are older LGBTI Kenyans, over 50 years old. We've had narratives in this country particularly about who matters, who doesn't matter, who exists, who doesn't exist. And we felt it important that, particularly since this is a smaller minority of the population, majority are obviously millennials and Gen Zs, that it's important to tell their stories because they've existed in the country, they've existed in our societies for centuries, and capturing it to begin having a conversation about the complexity of our society, the complexity of who it is that we are right across society. So when I hear the word identity, it's about really allowing us to understand that there are multiple identities, there are multiple types of people, there are multiple peoples in our societies, and the more we become aware and appreciative of that, then it allows even these who are most silenced to speak and to be visible. Yeah.
And I think that's true
That's
because
the work we do.
well, yeah, and I think because identity can be a very individual thing. So that choice between how to bring out the invisible, how to make it more contemporary or to make it more appreciated in the mainstream world is the thing I'm interested in. You do it through your writing with the spoken word, and some of the words that come to mind when I think about your performances are poignant, sometimes quite sad, but sometimes quite moving, but also optimistic. How do you move across that to be able to make sure that there's visibility across the board?
I'm not sure I have a clear answer for that because it's an ongoing challenge. It's a thing I'm trying to figure out, and that keeps changing. What I've focused on and tried to achieve is to not separate my work or my art from what then counts as the mainstream and what counts, what is going on in the world and in the country and in the city away from the stage. So the stage for me does not exist separate from the contemporary world. It's part of that, and part of it has been having a lot of references to music, for example, and the best example that comes to mind at the moment is 2019, which I cannot believe is 5 years ago. For some, wow. Anyway, 2019, we did a show on the life and death of Tom Mboya, and it happened to be the same time that the government, through the lovely KFCB and Ezekiel Mutua, were banning popular songs at the moment. One of them was Wamlambez, if anyone remembers Wamlambez. And it happened to fit right within the scope of what the story we were telling, because there was an aspect where Tomboy and his comrades were pushing against a sort of censorship, right? And even as we were working on the show, we didn't see any connection between Tom Mboya, who was assassinated in 1969, and Wamlambe's by sailors, which was on the airwaves at that moment. But the government made it possible for that connection to happen. And because the people coming to the shows are still the same people listening to the music, it resonated. So there's that side, and trying to also create within communities and within communities of artists, so that it's not in isolation. I'm not sure I've answered the question, but
No, I think it's perfectly
All right,
fine.
thank
Which
you.
kind of takes me to Nguru for a bit, because your collection is about a subject matter that does experience a lot of censorship publicly, a lot of very heavy moral judgment. How are you able to surface that against that? Do you think that you're speaking counter to that, and in what way?
We often, and I think most people, I mean, we're all Kenyans, so I think last year particularly, we, after the Supreme Court acknowledged the right for LGBT organizations to be registered, the pushback was pretty intense. From marches on the streets, from religious leaders having a lot of conversations. The parliament debate was horrifying because, I mean, we recorded some of that stuff, and and one of the things we kept asking ourselves, who are they talking about? 'Cause literally, it's the same way, you know, when we talk of GNZs as criminals, we're like, who are you? There's a disconnect between what you're coming out of your mouth and who it is that people are. And while this project actually is 13 years in the making, it didn't just happen last year. It's a conversation that started nearly 13 years ago by older. We must remember our society is a young society. It's a completely young society. And even the younger queer community often say they're no older queer folks. So it was important that they actually see that they've existed, they've been there, they've been doing their thing since whenever. And actually, that's why we actually even cut the age from 50 and older. We had started working on it when I was still 45. I'm now way over. So we had.
We've
I'm
done the
like,
math.
you know, we're like, wait a minute. I was not even supposed to be in the book. I'm still not. But you know, so it took a minute because people had to trust and give us their stories. But the need to visualize and even actually the book, the response, and it's a book for everybody, clearly, for adults. But our real intention was actually the younger queer community. That's who we wanted to give their history, for them to have a sense of belonging, to understand they don't just, they didn't just happen. That there've been people before them who've also struggled to create space for us to be able to move forward. So, yes, the laws exist. The communities, and particularly the younger generation, has continued to push the boundaries in terms of their space and the acknowledgement as who it is that they are. And this was our contribution to that. They've also existed folks who are out and living their lives in this society, despite those laws. Something maybe society. So when we saw the marches last year, we were taken aback. And I should say some of them were not organic. They're actually funded externally. I know that's Kenya. Everybody's funded for something, but anyway, we felt they were externally funded, and we felt as a community that we also had to stand up and push back as well. We're not going to have people just erase whole human beings who are doing absolutely nothing but living their lives. So I mean, that's where we come from. So despite, and the last thing is we also realized that in our society, we've got to tell stories. I mean, we can go to court and you can fight in the courtrooms and you can do those different things. But a story has a very different impact in how somebody actually understands a people. And we realize, the response we've gotten from people has been astounding. Just reading how a person is living, how they've struggled, or how they've celebrated, or how they've lived their lives, has really transformed a lot of people. I've seen it through my brothers, and they're like, really? That club? We used to go there. We didn't know you guys were there. Like, yeah, we were. But anyway, stories have a particular way of affecting somebody. And then, and our hope is that more of these, and definitely the other productions that we have, start shifting society over time to understand the complexity and the complexity of what it is that we are in society. So.
And that now brings me to you, Sarah, because you've done 2 series of photography which look at people living with albinism, and we know how that tends to be quite a sensitive topic. Tell us about that, and also getting the subjects to trust you to be able to show their lives.
Yeah. As far as the albinism series, I think I had read an article that was talking about how different people with albinism were being treated in Tanzania, and really just became interested in terms of understanding what the experiences people with albinism living in Kenya were having. And so then I kind of reached out to the Albinism Society of Kenya, who then put me in contact with a number of people, and then I ended up shooting the series. Yeah, I think for me, I've always wanted, or I'm not very good with words, but but I express myself with images, and so I think my way of contributing kind of to conversations is by showing them visually and trying to kind of address social issues in a non-contemporary way. When Instagram first came around, I think the images of Africa that you would have Googled to see would have been, the acacia tree, the giraffes, and so one of the first early campaigns that I remembered was, this is the Africa, this is the Africa I see, or this is the Africa I live in. And so people then were able to share their own images. And so then I think this is how kind of the democratization of the space kind of allowed people to share their own stories and their own narratives. You didn't have to have someone, publish your stories. And so then I think, that kind of started this shift in thinking about like, oh, you mean that is also Africa? This is also African. So I've always been interested in that conversation in terms of what is African and what does that look like? And so investigating kind of how to kind of challenge this notion of what Africa is, which differs,
Yeah, and that touches on how you've been able to use your own spaces to be able to drive a particular narrative, and that must feel liberating, doesn't it? Anyone can take this. It must feel liberating, yeah?
Yes, it is liberating. I mean, I think, if we look at like the coverage of the protests that have been happening, if this had been 5-10 years ago, you would have had journalists flying into the country. They would have told their stories from their perspectives. I have a camera in my hand. I don't really care if someone has commissioned me to work or not. I'm interested in telling the story. I'm interested in telling it from my perspective. And it was so refreshing to see so many young people out in the streets with their cameras, and also just looking at the images online like this, I'm like, oh, I didn't see that, and this person is looking at this, or even what draws your eye as a storyteller, right? Yes, for example, like there's so many people died, do you have to show a dead body? Sometimes the West wants to see like the grimiest thing, like, oh my goodness, like look, it's so horrible, right? But do you have to show a dead body to show how serious something is? And just there's very many ways to tell a story, and I think giving Africans and people, the opportunity to tell the stories from where they're from really gives a diverse perspective on, situations that are on the ground, or.
And actually, yeah, and that's critical. Our stories told by ourselves. I think it doesn't. The narratives around our communities has been often externalized, even the languaging and all that. So it was so critical to just get people. They're married people here. They're pastors in here. Like our stories from our perspective. I think that's liberating in itself, because then it's not. I think I just want to add to that. That's critically important, that we are able to tell our stories ourselves. Yeah.
So I agree with this. I'm going to try. I have thoughts, but I think they've been encapsulated properly there. So I'll lean back on the history and the poetry. But I've grown up in this very active political part of Kenya at the end of Moi and Kibaki and all that. So it's this feeling that we were in like chapter 2 of the Kenya experiment. And so we found all that nationalism, and this is how we're trying to build a country and become one people and all that. And the kind of history we were fed was very trimmed down and supposed to fit a particular narrative, while at the same time, the stories we're hearing at home and around were very, very ethnic and very divided and all that. And getting to a point where we can look back at history and realize it's so vast, it's this spectrum, and we've been forced to look at two colors.
We're not visible. We need to be visibilized, and we need to tell our stories. This is the first volume. We're going to be starting a second volume of color. Well, people are turning 50 every year, right? So we have lots of stories that can still be collected. And there were some folks in their 70s who were not able to get on this, and we want to get their stories into this book as well, into the next volume. And in the next volume, we'll also actually add families as well. I think it's critical. People come from families, and many families are very supportive, despite some of the narrative. Yes, they have families that are not, but there are many that are. And it's important to hear their side of the story and why they have those conversations. So the impact has been, the response has been overwhelming. That's all I can say. It's been quite something, yeah. And I think our goal, which was again to tell a story from our perspective, and also that group I mentioned that started that conversation, it's about Kule River Road, Kochini, not Westlands, not gypsies, okay? So folks who are living and having a particular reality. And that was what was so fascinating, because I was in that space and listening to folks, many of them are married men and women, and listening to their conversation was very different from what you read or what you see, or if you go to ST, there's also a class discourse in that. And it was important that story be told for people to understand what we're talking about, diversity of people and their sexuality. So that has happened, that came out. And so we're happy to populate, let's put it, populate the conversation. Maybe that's the correct word. It's to make it a bit more complex than the simple black and white ways that people talk about people. So yeah.
It's been incredibly affirming and supportive, because as an artist, there's always that demon. There's a couple of them, of self-doubt and imposter syndrome. And I'm very grateful for the people who come up to me after a performance, or even don't, and I bump into their sentiments online, and it's affirming to me as an artist and to the work itself. And it ranges from just people expressing how it's made them feel and validated their feelings and their expression, to even the support itself transforming. People are like, no, I came to support you so you can have rent, but if you're doing another one, I'm coming for the stories. And you can see that shift, and it's beautiful to watch. To people bailing us out of police cells and being like, no, I am here as a lawyer, but also because I'm a fan of your work and I want you to keep doing it. I'm like, oh, okay. I didn't know that it was going to get to that point. So it's incredibly affirming.
For me, I think the response is always positive. People will say, "Oh, thank you for sharing this. I didn't, it's nice to see it from your perspective. It's nice to see, So it's like he said, it's always good to know that there are people watching. But I think it's also important, social media has its highs and lows. I don't think you can create for a response, because you'll be very disappointed sometimes, and but of course, when people do kind of respond to the work well, then it is affirming. But I think that you must create, and until you can't create anymore, and and hopefully, even if it's just one person, that the work does something for someone else. Yeah. Also, sorry, also just to add, I think for me, one of my biggest joys is, when young people come to me and they're like, I love your work. It really inspired me to, to keep doing my work. And, and I think that to me is one of the biggest joys of kind of doing what I do is, giving other people, I don't know, the opportunity
Inspiration.
to express themselves.
So I'll bring in the audience in a couple of minutes, so do get ready with your questions. There'll be a mic that will be going around as well, I think. But yeah, going into that, because that also touches on what are your biggest sources of inspiration to just keep you going and keep affirming that sense of how do you reinforce your identity through work and other people's identities? Yes. Well, everyone knows.
I recently did a series on alternative young Kenyans.
Too, and it's all that, and you have a generation of young people who are tired of what's going on and are making themselves heard despite the odds against them. And in the late 40s and the 50s, we had another generation of really young people who were tired of how their elders were dealing with the colonial system, and that ended up in the Kenya Land and Freedom Army, Mau Mau as you call it, who faced empire with such little tools and support, and despite all arguments against this, and they won. So it's that, and the contagious hope that we keep alive throughout the times that have been, they've always seemed to be designed against the country. That really inspires me and keeps me going.
There's really not much more to add to that. But I was going to say, no, for those who believe and I'm older, an older generation possibly, who believe that this is a neo-colonial state, the struggles that have happened, that's why I couldn't say, that have happened through people trying to untangle that over time is one of the inspirations. And some of it is very personal. My grandmother, and and what they had to do at that time. So we're able to talk, maybe the younger generation, maybe their grandmothers may not have grown at that time. And the stories, I think her story and of struggle, she wanted education and she was not allowed as a woman at the turn of the century. But she still went, and she'd come home and my great-grandfather would discipline her. She would get up and go, and she'd raise us telling us those stories. And I remember as I grew up thinking, as a woman at the turn of the century, insisting that she wants to do this, so was just mind-blowing. So when I thought about ourselves, coming out later in many, I'm saying that's not like your grandmother at that time. So it's those kind of stories, but the stories of struggle right across, and why this generation, the Gen Zs, you should have seen my brother, we're all in our 60s, we're in the 60s and 50s. The celebration we had, because we've had these conversations of seeing this, and we thought we wouldn't see this. We thought we would see this. Our children will, our children's children, actually we kept saying, our children's children will bring the revolt to this country. Lord have mercy. Our children have shaken the system in ways that we can't even get. We're feeling ourselves, we're also feeling very liberated because it's the conversations we've had over time. So and that includes LGBTI populations. They're not external, they're part of the society. They were also on the streets. They also are children, so struggle. I guess the question is, there's been consistent struggle in our society, and we're trying to make this happen for everybody. So that's the inspiration. It's not a singular, but I think it's just a chronological process we've done as a society, and we continue to do. So yeah, that's how I would respond to that.
Any other questions? Yes. I think we'll get your mic first.
Thank you for the discussion. The question I have is linked to the last set of conversations, and it's about the balance between the past and the future, both in your identities, your personal identities, your work, the conversations you're seeing going around. Obviously, there's a lot from the past that's affecting us, and it's echoing now. And I hear a lot about struggle and bravery and hope. but I wonder how much space there can be for thinking of a future rather than reacting to the past, and a future that's our future, that's not a repair or a recovery or even a, you know, realizing what was the past, but how much can we build in our imaginations, in our creativity? Or is that not a stage we're at yet? I mean, there's already been so much done in the last few decades that I know of. Are we moving already so fast that we'll get there eventually, but it's not where we are now? I'd be interested in thoughts on that.
Not to sound condescending, but that your question kind of comes off as, for example, if someone says like, yeah, but you know, slavery was in the past and that's the past, and how do we move over to the future? Colonialism was in the past and that's in the past, and how do we move forward? I think it's very difficult to not look at the past when you have faced so much oppression and how it affects you and your identity, right? I think we use the past to inform ourselves, to draw parallels, to see how far we've come. And I think, you know, I mean, if you look at, you know, if I look at photography or art, you know, there's this idea of Afrofuturism, right? And so there are, I think, you know, some movements which are like, okay, let's see, what does this look like? What will that look like? But I think you can only look at the future in comparison to, like, to what the past was, right? So by looking at this, then you say, well, if this was that, then it's possible that it could look different. Like, how do you know what looks different if you don't look at what has already been there, I think?
I'll pick up right there. Because it's, for me, it's not a theoretical question. It's an active practice in the moment. And we keep thinking of the future as this thing that is in the distance, and it's coming, it's gonna hit us in a decade or something. No, it's lunchtime, and it's today in the evening, and it's tomorrow, and it's Tuesday. And we've been looking at the past to inform the present so we can imagine a future, and that is actively happening in the moment. And I'll give you an example of what the conversation that's happening at the moment is. The president has invited the youth for a roundtable, multi-sector, multi-whatever discussion. And one of the biggest arguments has been, no, but we've been watching, we've been growing up seeing commission of inquiries and committees and all that, and using this very recent and distant past, we've seen that they don't do anything. And so for the future, which is tomorrow and next week, and when you want to have this round table, we are not showing up that way. We need to imagine a different way to hold this conversation, if there is going to be a conversation. Or the question being put forward, how can we proceed with this conversation when there are children locked up in Naivasha who cannot see their future tomorrow as being free? So we are actively imagining and creating that future right now. And we're using the past and what we know of it and what we keep digging up to make sure that it doesn't look like that. And we are working alongside or against a governmental system that has disparaged the study of history. And, oh, how is Vasco da Gama going to help you? Well, Vasco da Gama is going to help us figure out how not to get Lamu invaded again. So we are actively creating that future. It's not a theoretical space of where the future belongs. We're here with it.
Truly, what could I add to that? I mean, all I would say, there are things happening right now that are creating our future. I don't know how else to express that we could not have imagined had we even planned that last week or 2 weeks ago. The holding MPs accountable in the village, in our towns, is remarkable. there's an awakening that cannot be reversed with commissions that make. There's such a disconnect. It's unbelievable. If your people are coming to the house of the MP to say, where, what the hell were you thinking? We've not had that before, and it's created a future that was not there. So some of us have stepped away. To Mitoka Ifot, we have just moved. And it's not just Gen Z, of course, the Gen Zs and millennials, and what's happening, because it's also society and their parents and everybody. Something is happening that's going to create that. There'll be attempts to push back, obviously, and disruption and a whole lot of things. But it's a little too late. It's happened. You can't reverse it. So I got your question, but that planning, it's happening. It's now. It's tomorrow. We don't know it's going to happen on Tuesday, and we're going to move forward. Now, either folks are going to get that and figure out how to harness the shift that's happening. It's in village. It's a whole. It's not Nairobi. It's the whole country. So I'm not going to sit and say I have a vision. What I have is incredible hope. It's such hope, such joy, and such sadness as well, because it's the young people are being killed. But we're gonna see that future. What's it called? Actualized. Mm. It is being actualized, and we will continue to see what that means as we move forward. Yeah.
And just to add, this is a panel on identity. A lot of times I hear people talk about, like, what is a Kenyan identity? When you go to, like, West Africa, they might be like, this is the traditional dress here, this is the traditional sound, this is the traditional, and so, even when you consider, like, what is the Kenyan identity? What is I think you have to kind of go back to the past to see, what happened, what was there pre-colonialism that was erased or stripped, in order to regain that and to see how can that be worked into what we have now to create something for the future, to create an identity as a whole, I think.
I suppose we'll have room for one more question. It's been really good, though, having a perspective of the future.
Hello, my name is Fwande, and Sarah has just brought a point that I came to the question that has been ringing in my mind. When we talk about identity, how do we delineate it from individuality, where you see that we can identify as a people, Kenyans, but when a need to arise comes, then I'm not Kenyan, I'm Asian, I'm not Kenyan, I'm this and this, I'm brown, I'm white. But when we are talking about, let's say, our athletes on the finish line, and then, we are Kenyans and we have the band, we identify as, but when it's not fitting us, then now we settle back to our individuality. I love you as long as you're gay, you're my friend, you're not like others. But when this person comes out, then they are not our family. Like us, we don't do that thing. That person dies, and like the late Binyavanga Wainaina, and we say, no, our son was a man of God, and he was never a homosexual, he was never this and this. Like, where is that line between the individuality and identity in this discourse? Thank you.
I'm so passionate that the mic is not even... I think that at the time we are in right now is addressing that question, right? When we were marching, we were like, Kenya, yes, we're all Kenyans, right? And then we kind of, went back online, and then it became, this person is like this person is like that person, these people do this, So it is tricky, I think what these, the state kind of in the country really has really brought up a sense of patriotism that probably has not been there for a long time, as you're saying, as opposed to like match, for sports or that type of thing. So I think the country is more united now than it has been in a long time. But you'll see where that kind of ugly head rears, where it's like, but these people are like this, or this person, I can't trust them because of that, And again, that is the process of healing that we need to kind of continue to work on a daily basis, which I think is just kind of, those divide and rule tactics that were used on us from a long time ago that are still in a healing kind of space. And so I think it takes time. But, calling things out, I think, when you see them and continuing just to remind ourselves that we're working on the same thing and we want the same things, and having that hope.
So adding on to that, it's as we began the panel, there was the question of what identity means to us. But I think it's fed by both the individual identity and the communal identity, and they overlap. I don't believe there's a clear-cut line. And some of these things are imaginary. Being Kenyan is imaginary. It's imaginary lines on a map. We have parents and grandparents who did not grow up Kenyan. They became Kenyan somewhere along the way, and we don't know what's going to happen. There might be another shift in the next 30 years, and now we're identifying as I don't know, Mbogi Genje or something. But that's imaginary. But within that, there are also there are facts. There is the color of our skin for the majority of the people, which is also not uniform, even if you identify as black. But for a lot of people, when we're living in this country, that's nowhere in your identity. And then you hear stories about someone crossing borders, living in another country, and suddenly now they have to identify as black. But that won't change. The color of your skin won't change, but it's part of that. Then you have your ethnic background, and you have your whatever gender expression and sexual orientation, and all these different things that affect you at an individual level, but you also share within different communities that overlap together then to become this bigger identity. And as Sarah was saying, we've seen that the overarching one. We've seen how powerful it can be in the last 10 days or so, including the things that are usually used to split us. And there's been such a clear example of how they can also be used for unity, because the tribal card was played. But at the same time, people are like, no, we are going to use that, we'll pick it, and we're going to talk about this finance bill in all these languages that you try to use to split us. The class card was played. It was like these people go to protest and they use Ubers and eat KFC and use iPhones, and guys were like, as a matter of fact, we will eat the chicken and then march and then and then use those iPhones to but at the same time, while also being aware that we're in these streets with people who do not have those privileges. And one of the things we're pushing against is how come there's such a huge split between the two groups of people. So all these things that have been used to split us, the kinds are different identities. Oh, now you have to fight for your county, or this county looks like this. They are all being harnessed, and I think the most powerful thing about that is looking at it in the eye and being like, no, we're not this homogeneous identity that we have to fit into, and there is a way to use it to transcend all the divisions.
And just an example, 2022 elections, right? 2022. We asked our nieces, nephews, have you registered, are you voting? They're all voting age. They all said no. Everybody had an excuse, I lost my ID, I had zero interest. We know that. And one of the Shiro comes to us and says, uncles, do you realize we're not tribal? We don't know we hear you and whatever this analysis you do, but we don't understand tribe. Like that's not who we are. And it was a very powerful, and that's how many, I don't know how many, 3 years ago, right? 2 years only, wow. 2 years. And these are the people now online, right? Across the country. Tribe is, I'm a Kalenjin, yes, I'm a whatever, but that's not the defining, the narrative that's been given since way past. So, this is what I say, something is happening. And I think, and that also includes a marginalized community. So there's something that's happening, and we're listening to that because that is transforming society in ways that, we hope for the better.
Our collective identity at the moment is treasonous criminals.
Oh, yes. Print t-shirts. And that brings us full circle to what the first question was, which is what is identity? And I'm so grateful to all of your thoughts, Ngartia, Sarah, and Nguru. You can follow Ngartia on Twitter. You can, well, it's not Twitter anymore. Twitter, TikTok, Instagram, Sarah as well. Nguru, I'm sure you'll be able to find the book available in bookshops quite recently. It's the place where you go online to mobilize the protest you did this week. Oh yeah, open baraza. And thank you all so much for your thoughtful insights, questions. They will be here for most of the day to be able to engage with them much further. And do stay on for the rest of the festival. It's a very packed program. Thank you all so much.